Hello and welcome to the Sthenics podcast. My name is Dennis and I'm your host, and today I'm here with David, our coach and physiotherapist and co-host.
Hello everybody.
Today is a very, very special episode and we will talk about the secrets of the planche. In today's episode, we will mostly cover the biomechanics and anatomy of the planche, talk about our personal history with this movement. And in the next episode we'll have about the planche, we'll talk about progressions and how to periodize the training for the planche in detail. So if you want to see more episodes like this, just share the podcast, give us a like, so we're motivated to do more. So now that that is out of the way, we'll just start with a little history lesson. So where does the planche actually come from and what is the planche?
Okay, let's start right away. So the planche originates from gymnastic, where it is classified as B or C skill. Mostly done on the rings in more complex, often seen more in more complex ring routines. And to actually get there, you start on the floor. This move, because it looks so iconic, it's later on with other gymnastic movements, like, for example, the front lever, taken by calisthenics athletes back in the start of calisthenics in, for example, the parks of New York, where it later down the road, kind of got from sets and reps and the classic legends you all know into a more complex sport, where it mostly fused with those gymnastic skills.
Exactly. I think it was like an evolution that people started working out in the parks, doing everything with the body weight. And with time, it just got easier and easier. And they searched for more and found their answer in the gymnastic movements, which are like, you start with a push-up and then you just evolve to keeping your legs up at a certain point.
Yeah, even back in the day, you could see there were done mostly some bent arm planches and push-ups there. So it's just was at that time also just the next progression, you could say, to make exercises with your own body weight harder than before. So how does a planche look like? A planche is basically an exercise similar to the push-up, with straight arms and the feet elevated. Your body is in a straight line and the shoulders strongly protracted, your elbows locked out, and the feet in the air. Yeah. That's basically what a planche looks like.
One thing, maybe, this is not defined in gymnastics, but we here at Sthenics usually teach the planche with a posterior pelvic tilt too, just because it looks nicer from a line. In the gymnastics, it's not part of the ratings, even though if your back is completely hanging through, you get less points for that for sure.
Exactly.
So moving on, we already talked about one. Mistakes in the planche and your personal journey with the planche. I think those two go hand in hand for everyone who tried to learn the movement. How did you start off? What were the most common mistakes you made when trying to learn it?
Yeah, so in short, I started out with no prior straight arm strength, but very long gym background. So I had to start in like the bent arm crow. That was the first progression. And since 2019, progressed to now holding a solid 2 to 3 seconds straddle planche. using mostly the most known and common progressions with some steps in between advanced tuck and straddle planche. And I'm currently trying to bridge the gap between straddle planche and full planche. Yeah, that's it in short. This is my current planche state. Dennis, at the other hand, is quite a bit advanced in this movement. Tell me about your story.
I started off training planche, I think, almost 6 or 7 years ago. The first 2 years of training, I mostly did basic movements, and only then found out about these skills that some people in Italy and Russia were doing, and they fascinated me. And so I just started off with the tuck planche, I think, and planche leans. And since I had decent genetics, I managed to move forward. I actually completely ignored the advanced tuck planche as a progression, which was a big mistake, and went directly to the straddle, actually starting from like the handstand into the straddle, because there were like tons of tutorials online that told you that that was the best option to do so. And so I did. And I kept, like, while going down, first of all, losing my shoulder blades, and second of all, bending my arms, which probably are the 2 most common mistakes we find in the planche.
How could you, Dennis? How
could I? the big coach Dennis. Yeah. And yeah, my planche looked like crap, honestly. I mean, I could hold my feet up in the air for quite some time. My hips were pretty piked and my arms were always slightly bent. This bent arm problem, I kept for years and years and years, and I'm still fighting with it, just because once you get used to a movement and don't condition it properly from the beginning, it's very difficult to get away from it. And you really have to start completely at the beginning again.
Okay. This is a nice transition to our next point, which is what are the most common mistakes? And you actually tackled quite a few there. So yeah. Bent arms is quite a common mistake, as well as not strongly protracted shoulders. A short note there, strongly protracted doesn't mean that you look like a hunchback. You just need to protract your shoulder blades. That is separately seen from the spine. Your spine doesn't have to be super rounded. This is mostly done for aesthetic reasons. When shoulder blades are strongly protracted, there is no need to flex your spine that much.
Yeah, usually when you put some depression in your shoulders, you fix that. But we'll get more on that later. I think other very common mistakes besides that are probably the anterior pelvic tilt, or having like bent legs or not really extending them completely, not activating the glutes, having zero activation in the core area. I think these are the things you see most of the time, and yeah. I kind of had them all.
Another very, very common one is to shorten the leverage by keeping your hip very high and piking the hips, which is another good transition to our next point, which is when we speak about the planche, we have to have a basic understanding of the biomechanic of levers in general. So planche, like other levers, is an isometrically hold exercise. So this means the force you generate with your muscle is equal to gravity. So you do not move in one direction and gravity doesn't pull you in the other direction. So you are very steady. In reality, of course, it's kind of a fight between those two. between your powering your muscles and keeping you up, and gravity pulling you down. Yeah, and so you always have a certain mass that is kept down by gravity, and you have like the motor, which is trying to opposite those forces. In this case, mostly your front delt muscles, your biceps, and your wrists are trying to fight gravity, and your head can be seen as a counterweight that's helping you because it's in front of your pivot points, which are the shoulders and the elbows, and you have the mass, which is just being dragged down by gravity. So this is your torso and your legs, of course. And like I said, the pivot point in the shoulders is where the forces are basically fighting with each other. So your front delt is trying to hold against gravity. I hope that was understandable. I don't want to make it too complicated, but in a basic general sense, this is what you need to know to understand the basics of the planche.
Yeah, and understand especially why this movement is so extremely hard. When you see it, like, and why it makes sense that if, for example, you have bigger legs and train legs too, the movement gets exponentially more difficult, and why genetics plays such a big role in this movement. Just because if it's if the movement, like if you have favorable levers, it will be 10 times easier if you don't. And that's why the differences between one person learning it in a very short time and another one taking years and years to learn it are extremely common here.
What can we expect? How much time does it take to learn it? This is a very common question, and this is answered by the biomechanics and your own anthropometrics, so your own anatomy. How long are your limbs? How heavy are your legs? How tall are you in general? And how much training experience do you have prior to starting out with the planche?
Exactly.
So those are the most important factors to consider, because it will determine how fast you are with progressing. And yeah, there are huge differences. So can you give a time span?
Yeah.
How long?
So, and coming back maybe to the story of how I learned the planche, I think we got stuck on the mistakes I used to do, and now we can pass to the how we corrected them. Actually, I had a pretty good base, and I think I was planching for about 3 years before I got a coach, Leo, who's a coach here at Sthenics too. And he knew already much more about periodization and form. And once he gave me the right way to train it and how to understand the right activation, everything went pretty quickly from there. So in just 3 to 4 months, I could hold a full planche. So in total, for me, it was about a 4-year journey. It could have been much shorter. And the time span we usually give is like from 1 to 5 years, even though 1 year can be, if you're not conditioned to hold this movement, extremely short for it. So people that learn it so quickly often run into overuse injuries, not in the muscles, but more in the tendons, just because they take years to adapt. So learning the planche in 2 to 3 years is not a shame, but it's actually a good way to do it sustainable over time.
I would say it's, I think, a very common time span, considering all factors, especially regarding injury. Injury is oftentimes a very time-consuming thing, and very common in planche too. For me, I started out at the beginning of 2019, so 2 years. I would say 3 years that I trained for the planche very consequently, with an injury in between. And as I said, only now holding straddle planche and trying to bridge the gap to full planche. So I think it could have been much shorter as well, but I dared to train legs in the meantime.
Yeah,
So,
you did.
and also not being the shortest, not being the lightest, but also not the tallest and heaviest too, but something in between, which also slowed down the progress.
Yeah.
So as you can see, it can take a lot of time.
Yeah. And it's not a shame. It's an extremely complex movement. It comes from the gymnastics. They start with 5. They condition themselves for over 10 to 12 years before even thinking about this movement. And we in calisthenics try to just pick it up from nothing. So it's absolutely fair. And it's good to really take your time doing it, being happy about the little steps. And it's a lot about understanding activations and then getting stronger. And understanding activations takes a different amount of time for every person. So I think to conclude it, these are the reasons why it's so difficult to give a realistic time frame for someone to learn it.
Yeah, everyone hates this answer. It's individual. It's not helping very much to, but you can't be precise about it as well, because there's so much individual factors that comes along with it. So there only can be given time spans from 1 to maybe 4, 5 years, depends. Yeah. Also, the last thing I wanted to say is conditioning of your tendons is a very important factor we have to consider as well, because your muscles adapt very fast. Strength is usually something that comes very fast, but your tendons take years to get strong enough to withstand the stresses you put them under. So a gradual increase is oftentimes much needed when progressing the planche. So this will take a lot of time, and one has to consider tendon health, of course, because injury will ultimately just lead to a delay, a much longer delay.
Yeah. Good. Now that all the introduction talk is out of the way, we will start with the anatomy. And first of all, we'll start from the wrists and then move our way up to elbows, biceps, triceps, shoulder, everything, every muscle and articulation that is important for this movement. So wrists, what position do we use to start with the planche? What's the most comfortable one? What do you think, David?
So that depends if you use parallels or the floor. So when you start on the floor, you want to turn your hands outward 45 degrees or so, because a lot of wrist extension is needed for the planche on the floor, and you can reduce the stress on the wrists when you turn them outward a little bit. I would suggest to start out on parallels and building your foundation there, because on your P-bars, you have a lot less stress on the wrist. because it's in a different position, which requires less amounts of wrist extension.
And the P-bar is gripped in a neutral way, like not supine or prone. There will be time for variations in the future, but when you start off and learn using a neutral grip, it's just favorable because you put less stress on the bicep or brachioradialis generally, which is one of the muscles where you need a long time to, like, it needs a long time to adapt to the stress you put on it. And generally you can put a bit more force on the forearms and make your life easier that way.
Yeah. Also, when you, for example, supinate the parallels, you have much more strain on the biceps, and also you take your wrist muscles more out of the equation, so you have more stretch on them as well. So now only the shoulder muscles are able to help you in the movement, which leads us to the next muscle group, your biceps and triceps.
Maybe one thing to add before we go to the bicep and triceps is one of the most common injuries we find in the planche in the beginning is forearm pain, or this typical release pain. And that's a question we get asked many times, like, or many clients that get in the coaching have in the beginning, because of two factors. One, the training volume usually is not adequate. They train too much, too often, and don't recover enough. And second of all, they put a lot of strain on their forearms when going into the planche, and they fall out right away. So you go from 100% tension to 0% tension in half a second. And that is what usually causes the pain. By doing a few exercises, wrist mobilization, and working like on the flexor muscles, and just having an adequate volume and letting the parallels, this is the most important point, go very slowly when exiting the planche, can avoid a lot of pain. So I think that before we move on to the next muscle is a point that many people are interested in.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good addition, because it is a very common complaint, which, by the way, when you get stronger, will eventually just get used to it, and it will stop and never occur when you don't just increase your training volume suddenly. Okay.
Biceps and triceps. Let's go, David.
Let's go. So your biceps is a very important muscle in the planche, because what a lot of people don't know is your biceps actually comes from the shoulder. So it has a function to the shoulder joint as well, and helps you with holding the planche. That's also the reason,
head, right?
That's the long head, exactly. That's also why when you see a lot of gymnasts, they, especially the ones that perform on rings, has gigantic biceps. And Dennis as well, of course.
Not that gigantic, sadly.
Other than that, your biceps is in a stretched position. So keep in mind, you have very high stress on your proximal and distal insertion. So your biceps attaches down from the elbow. This is where a lot of people sometimes feel discomfort, or in the front of the shoulder, in your in front of the shoulder.
Yeah, front delt area, somewhere here.
Exactly. Right. There isn't too much to say about the triceps. It's mostly has a stabilizing function in this case, and will keep your elbows nice and locked.
I think the important point to make is if you bend your arms, you will use more triceps and it will make the movement easier. If you're completely locked out, it will just have a stabilizing function and it will look good in the planche because you're like extended completely, but it's not doing much there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
A muscle that does much though is the shoulder.
Yeah, exactly. The shoulder is basically the powerhouse of the planche. So all shoulder flexors are the ones that will keep you up against gravity. Your chest muscles help with that as well, especially the upper part. Yeah, so having stronger front shoulders will definitely help you with holding a good planche. This is also why you can see in ring gymnasts, they have gigantic, massive shoulders, especially the front of the shoulder is massive. So that's, I think, all there is to say. The stronger, the better. And
the stronger, the better.
Yeah. I think we will talk a lot more about this topic on how specific you have to be with training this area and how much you have to train planche directly in our next episode when we talk about the programming. But now, for the anatomy part, that's all there is to know.
Yeah. More interesting are the shoulder blades, I think. So the shoulder blades is probably one, like the thing that's talked about the most in the planche, and two, where there are the most misconceptions. So first of all, by definition, a planche is executed with slightly protracted scapulas. That's just the definition.
Yeah, you try to protract as much as your anatomy allows it. And a very important muscle that a lot of people maybe don't know is the Serratus Anterior. This is one of the main shoulder protractors. And I would suggest to just look it up on Google to know, to basically know where it is. It originates from the ribs and attaches to your shoulder blade. And I think it can really help to see this muscle work to understand the planche better. So you try to protract your shoulder blades as much as possible. Like I said previously, you don't have to flex your spine.
Yeah, I think I before said like slightly protect your scapulas, just because many people, when they think about maximal protraction of their scapulas, they end up like freaking hunchback. Like you need to protract, but especially if you keep your shoulders depressed, it won't look like this. And having a neutral spine is extremely important, just to have the chest working too. Like the more you're close, the more the shoulder will have to work. And it's
this is
not aesthetic. Sorry.
Yeah, this is also the point why some people may perceive it as easier to flex your spine because they find it easier to maximally protract. It's very challenging to keep your spine neutral and protract as much as you can. So I think this is the reason why some people end up with doing the hunchback thing. Also, some do it for aesthetic reasons. They just like the view of this planche. Yeah. Okay.
I think a last point to make there maybe is the other example. There's people that actually are protracted and don't look like they are.
Yeah, exactly.
I think many people that listen to this podcast will be like, there's some very famous athletes that don't look like they don't protract at all. They are protracted. Like our anatomy is different and we all are kind of different. Protraction in one athlete will look different than in other one. And the important thing is they keep their shoulders down and the tension up. Their serratus is working, and you will see it in the planche if that is the case. It just looks 10 times more stable.
Yeah, exactly. This actually is a very important point for all the things we talk about. Your anatomy is individual, so it may look different, and there is, like in a handstand, no reason to freak out when there is something that may look a little bit different. So when your scapular is winging a little bit, it's not a big deal. Also, when you try to keep a posterior pelvic tilt, when you have a slight lordosis in your lumbar spine, it's not a big deal either.
Yeah, it's not possible for anyone either. So like you can't get crazy about certain details and just think about that one point. Like look at the general picture, and you will be better off in training.
So we talked about protraction. Also,
Yeah.
very important is depression of your shoulder blades. So this is mainly because of the way the serratus anterior works. So you need to try to also get your shoulder blades down and in protraction.
Yeah.
It's often very difficult to keep depression and protraction at the same time. So this is because every time you try to go in one position maximally, and you try to add another one, it's very difficult to hold them. So you have basically what you said in the beginning. You try to protract and depress as much as possible, but it will maybe a slight protraction and slight depression.
Yeah. You will see how you feel more stable. Like I moved away from giving extreme clues, just because people tend to go into this position and just they press themselves so much into that position that it leads to other problems and injuries with time. There's just a certain position that will feel more stable, and that's usually not maybe the maximum on one side or the maximum on the other, but it's usually something in between that looks good, that looks stable and feels good for you too. What won't feel good is being in complete elevation. It will lengthen your lever, it will make it harder, and even for some people, even though I think there's contradicting studies right now, lead to injuries, but I've seen it often enough in athletes that it led to problems just from a practical view.
Yeah, this leads to kind of to paradox advice, like technique is very, very important, but also at the same time, we don't have to over analyze everything and force ourselves into positions that are may not feeling stable and comfortable.
For you.
Yeah. So keep those technique cues in mind, apply them to your anatomy, and see how it feels and how it affects your performance.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Very good. Next one up, the core.
Next one up is core. Exactly. So the strength demands in your abdominal area and also in your lower back area in the back extensors are not very high. When you can hold a simple hollow body hold, laying on your back, straightening out your legs, or doing or laying on your stomach and elevating your legs, you are strong enough to hold the position in the planche. So that's basically it. Most of the people that train calisthenics don't have to specifically train core or back exercises to perform them in a planche.
I remember years ago, there like as soon as you saw, for example, an anterior pelvic tilt, people told you like you need to deadlift or you need to get a stronger rectus spinalis, etc., etc. It's mostly just proprioception, like understand how to engage a good posterior pelvic tilt, how to engage those glutes, how to engage the core. And to core engagement, that is a big point too, especially people that squat. Have the tendency to brace. So they brace by taking their air in and then pressing against the belly to like have almost like a swimming ring around their core area to stay stable there. This isn't a great idea for the planche. Just in a planche, you have to do it a bit differently. It's easier to get in a posterior pelvic tilt when you actually leave all the air out. So you take all the air away from the belly and then you kind of pull it in, almost like vacuuming it. And you almost from a feeling, you push it down and you push the hip down. And that will lead to so much more stability in the core area. That's one of the most difficult cues to understand, especially with all the things you have to think about while you press away from the floor with most of your muscles, especially being the shoulders and your arm and bust area. With the core area, you have to actually press down. And that is the most common mistake because it's so difficult to understand.
And it's the most annoying part about planche as well, because you press in opposite directions with different body parts, basically. But this is a very important cue, which also is important for your hips. So when you engage your glutes properly, so you also get kind of a sensation where you press your hip down. So when you suck your abdominal in, like when you breathe out all the air and suck your abdominal area in and brace, and also strongly contract your glutes, you will get a nice posterior pelvic tilt that looks very flat. When you also keep your hip proprioceptively down, this is what leads to, I think, the Italian standard line, the very nice flat line where everything is looks unhumanly in line.
Yeah, I think that is what differentiates for example, I mean, now it's very common, but before, when I started training in 2012 or so, in Italy, there was already this crazy searching for the perfect form, and people started doing that. And there's two things that make this very difficult. One point we already made is just from proprioception level. The second one is you can actually just start working on it when you start extending your legs. In an advanced like planche, pressing your hip down just doesn't feel the same than when you're in a straddle or in a one-leg straddle. But we'll talk more about this in the next episode.
Yeah, this just gets more important when you are in more advanced levels like straddle planche.
Yeah. Okay. And I think we
also started talking about the hip. Mm-hmm. This mostly gets very important when talking about the straddle planche, because there how your hip, so if your hip is an anterior pelvic tilt or posterior pelvic tilt, also depends on how far you straddle your legs.
Exactly. You can try right now. Just get up if you're sitting, not if you're driving. Wait for that. Just get up and try to straddle your legs a tiny bit and try to go into a posterior pelvic tilt. See how that works. Probably will work if you don't straddle a lot. If you now try to straddle more and try to do the same, you will feel how the psoas doesn't want to go in that position, and like your hip mobility just stops you from going into this posterior pelvic tilt. Therefore, if you open your legs too much in a straddle planche, you won't be able to keep a posterior pelvic tilt, which leads to two things again. First of all, you will need to straddle narrow to have this perfect, beautiful line, which makes the planche more difficult at the same time. So planching with a bit more open legs and maybe a tiny bit of anterior pelvic tilt can be a step in between the advanced stock and the nice straddle planche.
Exactly. Yeah, I think in the usual progressions there is this is never mentioned, but it's like you said, most people start out with I would say compensated straddle planche, where you have very wide straddle and anterior pelvic tilt, and also the hips are piked a little bit. So those are all compensations to shorten the lever. So the mass which is pulled down by gravity is closest to your shoulders and therefore will be easier. So this is how most of the people start out with their straddle planche. But there should be the goal of progressing towards a narrower straddle, a posterior pelvic tilt, which is basically the end goal, where you should say, okay, this is the step between the full planche.
Exactly. The beautiful thing about learning the planche like this, and it depends from person to person how fast it works, like always. For example, if you watch our YouTube video, the straddle planche journey, the planche journey of Patrick, for example, he's very gifted and he understood the thing with the hip very well, very quickly, and could straddle right away in a posterior pelvic tilt, which led to learning the full planche extremely quickly. Once you can straddle like that with a posterior pelvic tilt, it's almost more difficult than holding a full planche, just because the activation in the straddle is extremely hard to do. And you have to think about more things, while in the full planche, keeping up a posterior pelvic tilt is just easier, and you just need to be strong enough.
Yeah, this is because for your body, it's much easier when, for example, your legs are pressing together, because this will stimulate a signal to your brain, which tells your joints, the joints tell your brain where they are in space. And it's a lot harder to know where you are in space when you have a straddle that's in between the end position, so maximum straddle, or closing the legs together and pressing them together. You can do a little experiment. You can close your eyes, just hold your arm to the side, and try to know where different angles are, or just pressing to the table or something else, press against something. It's much easier for you to know where you are in space when something is pressing against your limbs, other than just telling where your arm in space is without pressing anything against it. I hope that was understandable.
I think it was. I kind of understood it, so we should be all right. Yeah, I think last point are the legs. The lighter, the better, honestly. It's just, especially calves. If you have big calves,
that's the untold secret.
Yeah, the untold secret about the planche. But I mean, it's not untold. It's like a big critique point.
Obvious, not so obvious.
Yeah. And having bigger legs just makes it harder, more difficult, takes more time. It's something you have to take into account, and that's that. Bend knees. If you tend to bend your knees, look to really bring some tension into the quadriceps, and your legs should be straighter right away.
Yeah, I think that's all there is to the legs. Point your toes for a nicer aesthetic.
Yeah, that helps too, to keep general tension. It's easier to keep the tension in the whole leg, in the quadriceps, in the glutes, when you actually point your toes.
Yeah, so, exactly. But other than keeping your knees completely straight, there is nothing really to keep in mind.
Yeah. I think we went through everything, the whole body. So I hope you liked this episode. If you did, please do us the favor, comment, ask if you have any question, like, subscribe, all the fun stuff. It helps us grow. And just repost it if you hear it on Spotify, on Instagram, in your story. It helps us out a lot, especially since it's a growing channel and we don't have that many subscribers yet. So we're motivated to do the next episode where we will tell you how to really train a planche and cut through all, sorry the wording, bullshit you find online about fast progression, 1-year progressions, magic exercises that just doesn't exist. Everything that exists is consistency, hard training, smart training, thinking about what you're doing, and staying injury-free. And we'll cover that in the next episode. So yeah, you can find us here on YouTube at Sthenics, or on Instagram at @Sthenics_. You can find David on Instagram.
Calisthenics_David.
Exactly. And you can find my profile on Instagram, Dennis_Calis. As you can see, we have very a lot of fantasy in our
creative names. Very creative.
Yeah. So
yeah, thanks guys, much appreciated, and see you next time.